This is MTG Burgeoning, and in this video we are going to showcase the 10 worst planes to add to your planar deck. Planechase debuted in 2009 as a Magic the Gathering game variant. A second Planechase set was released in 2012, and a subsequent Planechase anthology was then released in 2016, which offered various reprints of the planes and phenomenons created from the two previous Planechase products. More than a decade passed without any new additions to the Planechase format. That was until the Commander 2023 March of the Machine pre-constructed EDH decks were released, which produced a total of 20 new Planechase planes. At the time of this video's upload, there are a total of 103 different planes in Planechase. But not all planes are created equal. Here I'm going to tell you the 10 worst planes to put into your planar deck and why. When you planeswalk away from Norn's Dominion, destroy each non-land permanent without a fate counter on it, and then remove all fate counters from all permanents. Whenever chaos ensues, you may put a fate counter on target permanent. Paralysis. That's the true effect that this plane offers, a paralyzing feeling of dread and uncertainty. The odds are exactly the same of putting a fate counter onto a permanent or blowing up everything on the battlefield except for lands. If you are ahead in the game and you reveal this plane from your planar deck, then are you considering rolling your planar die? If you are behind in the game and you reveal it, then you are going to roll your planar die and hope for chaos. But your odds are only 1 in 6 of rolling it. Removal spells are most effective when cast strategically, particularly when a player can play around and plan around its impact. Here, the unpredictability of revealing Norn's Dominion, which is one of the appealing fixtures of the Planechase game variant, can let you down when you're ahead and when you're behind. Keep your removal spells in your hand and keep Norn's Dominion in your storage box. When you planeswalk away from Sanctum of Serra, destroy all non-land permanents. Whenever chaos ensues, you may have your life total become 20. This plane is a numbers game, and most likely, it's a game that you cannot win. If you are ahead in the game and reveal Sanctum of Serra, then most likely you are not planning to roll your planar die for fear of blowing up the battlefield. In this scenario, you are not directly benefiting from your plane by adding to your board state, which allows opportunities for your opponents to catch up and level the playing field. If you are behind in the game and reveal Sanctum of Serra, then your odds are 1 in 6 of planeswalking away and destroying all non-land permanents. Rolling chaos on this plane could be fruitless, particularly if you are playing EDH, where players begin the game with 40 life. Outside of niche builds, no one is going to take their life total down to 20 upon rolling chaos on this plane. Keep the removal spells in your hand and leave Sanctum of Serra out of your planar deck. When you planeswalk to Enigma Ridges, each player who controls fewer lands than the player who controls the most lands searches their library for a number of basic land cards less than or equal to the difference, reveals them, and puts them into their hand. Personal bias motivates the placement of Enigma Ridges on this list. Full disclosure, I do not like to play group hug themed decks. A group hug build is sculpted for the purposes of supporting opponents by providing them with resources and benefits throughout the game. This is fundamentally antithetical in any type of win or lose forum. If your goal is to win a game of Magic the Gathering, then why would you put any cards into your regular deck or your planar deck that help to level the playing field between you and your opponents? Granted, this plane's chaos ability serves you well, as whenever chaos ensues, you draw a card, and then you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. However, is this effect worth ensuring that various opponents are guaranteed multiple land drops after you planeswalk to this plane? Keep Enigma Ridges and its do-goodiness out of your planar deck. When you planeswalk to Furnace Layer and at the beginning of your upkeep, select target player at random. That player discards a card. If that player discards a land card this way, they lose 3 life. Note that the randomly selected player could be you. And unless you are piloting a Madness deck or graveyard build, then this plane punishes you for its presence on your side of the battlefield. Granted, the odds are in your favor that this effect will target an opponent, but the odds are even better for you if Furnace Layer is not in your planar deck at all. Admittedly, its Chaos ability is powerful, as whenever Chaos ensues, you destroy target non-land permanent. This ability by itself heightens the value of this plane, particularly if an opponent has a troublesome non-land permanent on their side of the battlefield, and they always do. However, there is only a 1 in 6 chance that you will be able to activate this Chaos ability, and in the meantime, problematic non-land permanents could continue to pile up on your opponent's sides of the battlefield. Keep your removal spells in your regular deck, and keep Furnace Layer out of your planar deck. The Aeon Fog has players skip their untap steps. Whenever you roll Chaos, untap all permanents you control. Disclosure number 1. It is understood that stacks builds are prevalent across various formats in Magic. These decks are constructed for the purposes of limiting and or restricting opponents' abilities to play spells and keep permanents in play. This gameplay dynamic allows the stacks player to grind and control their way to victory as the only player at the table that is actually playing at the table. A stacks player's opponents become spectators, particularly when stasis-like effects like the Aeon Fog are easily avoided by that player. Disclosure number 2. This plane's placement into this top 10 list is motivated by my personal bias against this type of archetype. I enjoy playing Magic the Gathering. I love playing Magic the Gathering. Sitting at a table with Magic cards in my hand and not being able to play due to the efforts of the stacks player is downright unnerving. I understand it is a part of the game. I understand that there is a segment of the Magic population that plays this style. I have seen it. I have played against it. It does not impress me. Don't be the player that makes other players become spectators, and don't put the Aeon Fog in your planar deck. Whenever a player casts an instant or sorcery spell with a single target, Glimmer Void Basin has that player copy that spell for each other spell, permanent, card not on the battlefield, and or player the spell could target. Each copy targets a different one of them. When paired alongside a dedicated spell slinger build, this plane could provide great value, particularly for the purposes of managing the battlefield and your opponent's resources. However, there is such a high probability of this plane backfiring that its inclusion into your planar deck is just too risky to consider. All it takes is one well-timed instant or sorcery spell from an opponent to have Glimmer Void Basin's static ability devastate you. Disclosure. It is a feat as rare as winter roses that I would include cards in any decks that have the potential to harm me or act as a barrier to winning the game. This bias definitely motivates my placement of this plane into this list. Even its Chaos ability does not provide benefits solely to you, as whenever Chaos ensues, you choose target creature. Each player except that creature's controller creates a token that's a copy of that creature. Gifting your opponents with free creatures most likely will not win you the game more quickly, and neither will providing them with an opening to completely ravage your hand, resources, and or board state. Keep the cards that help your opponents and or hurt you out of your regular decks alongside Glimmer Void Basin. If a creature you control would untap during your untap step, Edge of Malakal's static ability puts 2/1/1 counters on it instead. Whenever Chaos ensues, untap each creature you control. Keeping your creatures tapped does not allow you to attack with them during your turn, and it does not allow you to defend yourself during your opponent's turns. By adding this plane to your planar deck, you are exchanging the ability of your creatures to attack and defend during a round of turns for the reward of putting 2/1/1 counters on each tapped creature. Is that worth it? Without any spells or peripheral abilities to untap your creatures, you are relying on either rolling Chaos or planeswalking away from Edge of Malakal for the purposes of untapping your creatures, which you have a 1 in 3 probability of doing so. Note that this is not a global effect. Your opponent's creatures are not affected by this plane's static ability, just yours. Put your +1/+1 counter spells and effects in your regular deck and leave this plane out of your planar deck. Let your creatures do what they are meant to do: attack and defend. Skybreen has each player play with the top card of their library revealed. Spells that share a card type with the top card of a library cannot be cast. Whenever chaos ensues, target player loses life equal to the number of cards in their hand. Adding Skybreen to a planar deck is an admission to willingly wanting to reduce the frequency and number of spells you can cast during a game. You will not always know what types of decks your opponents have crafted. You will not always know how many various card types among spells are accounted for among your opponent's decks. If you and 2 opponents sit down for a game of EDH with Planeswalker decks, and opponent number 3 is playing Vampire Tribal, you and those 2 Planeswalking opponents could be in for a very, very long game. Even this plane's chaos ability does not compensate for its lack of helpfulness. Why would you include any card that prohibits your ability to cast spells, whether it is in your regular deck or your planar deck? Keep Skybreen out of your planar build and cast your spells without any self-imposed restrictions or limitations. Prov has 2 inverse static abilities. If you cast a spell this turn, then you cannot attack with creatures. If you attack with creatures this turn, then you cannot cast spells. Note that this is not a global effect. Your opponents are able to cast spells and attack with creatures freely during the same turn. Surely the chaos ability of this plane provides a cachet of benefits to help hedge against these detrimental effects. Well, whenever chaos ensues, gain life equal to the number of cards in your hand. Casting spells, adding to your side of the battlefield, advancing your board state, and attacking your opponents with creatures is a long-standing formula for winning games of Magic the Gathering. Prov interferes with and stunts this plan. During your turn, it is one option or the other. You can choose to cast spells to impact the battlefield or interact with your opponents, or you can send your creatures into combat for the purposes of lowering your opponent's life totals. If your deck does not rely on creatures, then you are not considering Prov for your planar deck anyway. And if your deck does rely on creatures, then why are you considering Prov for your planar deck anyway? At the beginning of your upkeep, you put a flame counter on Nar Isle, and then it deals damage to you equal to the number of flame counters on it. Am I missing something here? Surely this is a mistake, and this effect really deals damage to any target player, or any target creature, or any target at random. No, no, and no. Okay, then the Chaos ability must make this plane more viable by hedging against this self-inflicted direct damage effect, right? Well, whenever Chaos ensues, Nar Isle deals 3 damage to target player or planeswalker. That's it. That's all this plane does. You reveal it from your planar deck, and at the beginning of your upkeep, the damage starts to pile up. 1 point, 2 points, 3 points, and your only hope is to planeswalk away. But with a 1 in 6 chance to do so, the odds are not in your favor. Maybe you will get lucky and deal at least 3 measly points of damage to target player or planeswalker by rolling Chaos, which, again, is a 1 in 6 chance to do so. This effect doesn't even target creatures. Most likely, this plane will deal more damage to you than it will deal to your opponents. Keep it out of your planar deck. Do you agree with the planes on this list? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below and tell me which planes would make it into your top 10 list. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things magic.